They called it the Devil's Seat, the oak chair where Thomas Busby drank his last ale before the noose. When the sun fell over Thirsk that night in 1702, witnesses said he cursed every soul who dared sit where he had sat. "May death come swiftly to any who take my place," he hissed, eyes black with rage. They thought it was drunken nonsense, just a dying man's pride clinging to a final comfort. But the curse didn't fade with his breath. The tavern where the chair remained became a threshold, a place where time itself refused to move on. Locals whispered that the seat carried his sin, that the oak itself remembered the weight of his guilt. No one believed it, until the first man who mocked the story died the next day, neck broken as if pulled by invisible rope. And so, through centuries of fire, war, and disbelief, the chair endured, untouched, unburned, waiting. After Busby's death, the inn stood untouched for months. Superstition turned to ritual. Locals crossed themselves when they passed. Travelers still stopped for ale, but no one sat in the chair. When a soldier ignored the warnings, laughing at old wives' tales, his regiment buried him days later. Word spread like wildfire across Yorkshire. The chair kills. The legend outlived every witness, growing with every retelling, rooted in fear, watered by coincidence. For centuries, the chair waited, silent, patient, as if the curse itself were watching for the next fool who thought themselves braver than fate. The innkeeper tried to sell it once, hoping to rid his home of whispers and dread. But every buyer withdrew, claiming the wood felt unnaturally cold. When one dared to lift it, the legs splintered his hand. After that, it became more relic than furniture, an altar to something unholy. The oak grain darkened year by year, like it absorbed the shadows that fell upon it. Men said the curse was Busby's revenge, but others whispered that he had simply awakened something older, something that lived within the wood long before it was shaped by man. Centuries passed, and the world forgot Thomas Busby. But the chair remained. When the tavern fell into disrepair, it was moved to the cellar, draped in burlap, its curse still breathing beneath layers of dust. A child once found it and dared to sit, laughing, until his father dragged him away. That same night, lightning struck the boy's home, leaving him untouched amid the ash. The chair's legend grew again, feeding on fear. People said it didn't kill at random, it chose. Wow. By the 20th century, the Busby stoop chair had become more than legend. It was proof that history refuses to die quietly. Curators, thrill seekers, and soldiers all came to see it, yet none dared sit. Some swore they heard whispers. Others said it hummed when touched. One night, a group of locals, half drunk and defiant, decided to end the curse once and for all. They would burn it, but they didn't yet understand. Flames consume only what belongs to the living. They said it was a cold night when they tried to burn the chair. The war had ended, but fear still clung to Thirsk like smoke. The locals gathered behind the tavern, their breath misting in the dark, determined to end the legend once and for all. The fire started easily. Old timber and oil ignited with a roar. Yet as the flames rose, they bent away from the oak, curling in unnatural shapes, leaving the chair untouched. The men whispered that it wasn't the chair that resisted the fire, it was the fire itself that obeyed it. When dawn came, the pyre had turned to white ash, but the chair stood upright, gleaming with dew, not a mark upon its surface. From that night on, no one dared even look at it for long. They called the priest next, believing that only faith could unmake what evil had made. He arrived quietly, carrying a small iron cross and a flask of holy water, but when he approached the chair, his hand trembled before the air around it. He said later it felt as though the wood breathed, pulling heat from his skin. When he sprinkled the water, it hissed, evaporating before it touched. That night, the priest could not sleep. He dreamt of a man hanging beneath a blood moon, whispering from the rope, "Sit if you dare." When the inn closed for good, the villagers locked the chair in a back room. sealing the door with nails and prayers. But time has a way of peeling back old fears. Years later, construction workers renovating the building found it again. One laughed, sitting for a moment to rest. Hours later, a beam collapsed, killing him instantly. The foreman ordered the chair removed, but no one would touch it. So they built around it, walls, floors, and history, leaving it trapped like a secret heartbeat beneath the wood. Eventually, the museum took it, more for spectacle than safety. They placed it behind a velvet rope, labeled Busby Stoop Chair. Do not touch. Visitors whispered, laughed, dared each other to sit. One cleaner moved it to mop the floor, and by dawn he was dead from a fall. It became a story the staff spoke of quietly, as if afraid the chair could hear. Some said it hummed when the lights went out. Others swore they saw shadows beneath it that didn't belong to the legs. It should have ended that night in the flames, but legends don't die when people want them to. They die when people stop believing. And no one ever stopped believing in the Busby chair. In 1978, when the museum nearly caught fire, witnesses swore they saw the blaze stop inches from its display. The floorboards charred black around it, but the wood remained unmarked, glistening like it had been polished by the smoke. The firefighters wouldn't touch it, one muttered. It doesn't burn because it belongs to hell already. They kept a list. Every name, every date, every cause of death, neatly typed on museum paper, tucked inside a file marked incidents. At first, the coincidences seemed almost laughable. A soldier killed in a crash 2 days after touching the chair. A builder crushed at the site the week after he moved it. But the pattern grew undeniable. None of them had simply fallen. They were taken. Witnesses spoke of a sudden chill, a sense that something was behind them, waiting. The chair wasn't just cursed, it was aware. The longer it was ignored, the louder its vengeance grew, echoing through generations like the heartbeat of a crime that time refused to bury. The local historian, Graham Harker, dedicated his life to tracing the deaths. He uncovered a chilling symmetry. Every man who defied the curse died of fractured bones, as though the rope had followed them home. He spoke on record, saying he felt watched every time he entered the room. Within a year, his body was found at the bottom of a quarry, neck broken, spine twisted, the same grim mark that began it all. When police retrieved the evidence, the report noted something impossible. The chair's display glass was fogged from the inside, like something had been breathing there. When investigators reopened the case, skepticism became survival instinct. Detective Alan Marsh examined the evidence with a scientist's precision, refusing to believe in superstition. But the deeper he looked, the stranger the facts became. Burn marks that stopped in perfect circles, reports of heat without flame, and photographs showing ghostly outlines around the chair. One image captured his own shadow seated where he had not been. He locked the folder that night, vowing never to return. But curses don't need believers. They need witnesses. The chair was sealed again, this time suspended on the wall, too high for anyone to sit. They thought they'd beaten it, that containment was victory. But the deaths didn't stop. They only changed shape. Visitors began to vanish from the records, their names never logged, their faces appearing briefly in reflection photographs before fading. One night, Elizabeth heard the security alarms go off. When she arrived, the glass was intact, but the chair had turned slightly, its legs now facing the exit. By the time the museum closed for renovation, no one wanted the responsibility of moving it. Even the removal team refused to touch the glass. The curator decided to document its final placement, but when she reviewed the footage later, her voice grew quiet. For in the final seconds, before the tape cut to static, she saw the impossible. The chair's shadow rising, stretching toward her reflection. The file was archived and labeled, "Do not reopen." The legend of Thomas Busby had claimed its next generation. Years later, the museum reopened under new management, its floors polished and its legends rewritten as folklore. But for Elizabeth Hunter, now head curator, The past refused to stay buried. She inherited not only the archives, but also the sealed exhibit, Busby's chair. She told herself she didn't believe that history was only paper and wood. Yet, every night after closing, she heard it. The faint sound of wood creaking as though someone had just stood up. It came from the gallery no one entered after dark. She began leaving the lights on, not from fear, she insisted, but from duty. Still, when she passed the chair's display, her reflection never moved quite the same way she did. She tried to rationalize it. Drafts, structural movement, overwork. But one night the lights flickered and the motion sensors activated. The cameras caught no intruders, only the chair vibrating softly within its case. She reached out to touch the glass, and the static stung her fingertips. A whisper, low and rhythmic, seemed to pulse from the oak itself. Sit, sit. That night, she dreamed of gallows swaying under a red sky. When she woke, her bedsheets smelled faintly of smoke. Elizabeth contacted Graham Harker's surviving relatives, searching for his old research notes. What she found among them chilled her. Records of Busby's final words, copied in the priest's handwriting. "The chair is my throne, and I'll rest when they do." The ink had soaked into the page so deeply, it bled through both sides. She began to suspect the curse was never about revenge but possession. Every soul who defied it had joined him. She wasn't reading about ghosts anymore. She was reading about a kingdom. When she returned to the museum the next evening, she found footprints, bare, small, and wet, leading from the chair's case to the exit. The glass was unbroken. The alarms never triggered. For a moment, she thought she was losing her mind, but then she noticed the condensation on the inside of the glass again. Only this time, it formed words. Still warm. The handwriting matched the priest's from 3 centuries before. Elizabeth's reports to the museum board were polite, factual, restrained. Humidity levels inconsistent with recorded temperature. Possible HVAC malfunction. But privately, she began recording nightly observations, whispering her findings like prayers. "It's waiting," she said on the final tape, voice trembling. "It doesn't want to be displayed. It wants to be seen." That same week, the cleaning staff refused to work nights, and in the footage from the final night shift, as she walked past the case, her reflection did not follow. When Detective Alan Marsh returned to Thirsk, he carried 30 years of rationality on his shoulders and left every shred of it there. He'd once dismissed Busby's curse as folklore, but the police reports, the fire logs, the death records, they all pointed to something that logic couldn't hold. He wasn't investigating a crime anymore. He was interrogating history. Elizabeth Hunter met him after hours, her eyes hollow with sleeplessness. She spoke softly, as if afraid the walls were listening. "You can't study it," she whispered. "It studies back." Marsh said nothing, but that night he began to hear the same creaking she did. Marsh reviewed the museum's security footage, searching for evidence of tampering. But what he found instead were moments of absence, frames where the chair simply wasn't there. Not moved, not obscured, gone. Then, after several seconds of static, it would reappear, always at a slightly different angle. He ordered technicians to check for signal loss, but every camera, every circuit was flawless. Elizabeth told him to stop. "It's how it finds you," she warned. Yet the next night he returned alone, drawn by something he couldn't name. When Marsh examined the chair in person, he carried every tool of logic. UV light, thermometer, recorder. The readings made no sense. The temperature inside the glass rose while the air outside dropped. The recorder captured voices. Busby's curse repeated backwards, low and distorted. And for a split second, the reflection in the glass wasn't his own. It was Busby's, neck twisted, eyes fixed in triumph. Marsh stepped back, gasping, the air too thick to breathe. "It's not a curse," he muttered. It's a door. Elizabeth begged him to leave, but obsession had already taken root. Marsh began connecting every unexplained death back to the same date, October 12th, the anniversary of Busby's execution. He believed the chair demanded an offering, a cyclical act of remembrance. The curse wasn't random, it was ritual. On the eve of that date, Marsh stayed in the museum, alone, determined to disprove the legend by sitting in the chair himself. He never reached it. They found him at dawn, collapsed in front of the exhibit, no signs of struggle. Just a look of absolute terror frozen across his face. The coroner ruled cardiac arrest, but Elizabeth knew better. The security footage ended exactly 6 seconds before his final breath. The chair's case stood open, though no one could explain how. The rope barrier lay unhooked as if someone, or something, had passed through. From that day forward, she refused to enter the gallery alone. Yet sometimes, in the silence of closing hours, she swore she heard the soft scrape of wood against floorboards. After Detective Marsh's death, the museum board demanded answers, and Elizabeth found herself alone beneath the weight of centuries. In desperation, she turned to the only man who had faced the chair before and lived. Father Callum Reeves. He was old now, frail, his sermons reduced to whispers. But when she spoke the name Busby, his eyes filled with a terror too old to be recalled by memory alone. He confessed he had once tried to bless the chair, decades earlier, and that something inside it had spoken back. "It's not a ghost," he said softly. "It's a covenant. The chair didn't trap souls, it housed them. And every time someone defied the curse, it grew heavier with the weight of the damned." Father Reeves led Elizabeth into the church crypt that night, bringing an ancient volume wrapped in cloth. He said it contained the last rites of objects, that even relics could be unmade with words, if faith were strong enough. As he opened it, the candles flickered violently. "Morus, and figures, swishi, haustamis." The words on the page were written in Latin, but one line had been crossed out and rewritten in a darker ink. "Do not sanctify what hell has claimed." The priest's hand shook as he traced it. "It can't be blessed," he whispered. "It was never cursed by man." He confessed that he'd tried to burn the chair himself once in secret. Decades earlier, he and 2 altar boys had carried it behind the church, intending to cleanse it with fire. But the moment the torch touched its surface, the flame recoiled and turned blue. One boy screamed as his sleeve caught fire. The priest had dropped to his knees, begging for divine mercy. When the fire died, the chair was unmarked, but the boy's hand bore the shape of its carved armrest forever. "I buried him without a coffin," the priest said, voice breaking. "I couldn't risk the wood remembering." Now, decades later, he could barely finish his confession. He told Elizabeth that Busby had made a pact before his hanging, swearing his soul into the wood itself. He said no rope could bind him if the oak remembered his touch. The priest's voice trembled. And it did. He pulled from his coat an aged piece of parchment. Busby's last testament, signed in his own blood. Reeves begged Elizabeth to destroy it, but she couldn't. The ink still shimmered wet. Father Reeves passed away 3 days later. Heart failure, they said. But when Elizabeth entered the church to pay respects, she found a single object beside his coffin: the rosary, coiled tightly around a small splinter of oak. No one knew where it came from. She recognized the grain instantly. The chair had sent a message. There was no blessing strong enough to silence it, no faith deep enough to deny it. And as she stood over the coffin, she realized the curse wasn't confined to a piece of wood. It was spreading through everyone who tried to end it. The day the museum announced the closure of its cursed collection, Elizabeth knew it was her last chance. The priest's death had convinced her of one thing: the chair couldn't be contained, only confronted. She called for one final cleansing, a symbolic act of faith, to burn the Busby chair under consecrated flame. As night fell, a storm gathered over Thirsk. The air felt charged, heavy with intent, like the earth itself was holding its breath. She stood beside the fire pit, rain dripping from her coat, the chair resting silently before her. No matter how she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, was already sitting in it. She struck the match and whispered the priest's words, each syllable trembling against the wind. The flame caught, hissing in the rain. But when it reached the base of the chair, it twisted backward, consumed by its own smoke. The pyre burned around it, ash collapsing inward, yet the oak remained untouched, gleaming through the haze. A sound rose from within, not crackling, but breathing. Elizabeth stumbled back, eyes wide with disbelief, as the fire bowed away from the wood, bending like reverence. "It won't burn," she whispered. "It won't burn." In the flame she saw faces. Busby, the priest, the soldier, the builder, each one flickering into view for only a heartbeat before dissolving into smoke. The chair didn't destroy them. It kept them. Every soul who had defied it remained trapped within, their whispers rising in a chorus of pleading and laughter. Elizabeth fell to her knees, the sound echoing through the storm. She realized then that the curse was not punishment but possession. An inheritance passed to anyone who dared to witness it. The chair wasn't waiting to be burned. It was waiting to be claimed. When the storm finally broke, the fire died on its own. The field was blackened, the air acrid, but at the center of the ruin stood the chair, unburned, glistening with raindrops that hissed on contact. Elizabeth collapsed beside it, exhausted, her clothes scorched but her body untouched. The dawn crept across the horizon, casting pale light on the oak's polished surface. For a moment, she thought she saw her reflection smiling back. Not her reflection, Busby's. The curse hadn't ended. It had simply chosen her. Weeks later, the museum reopened under new management. The Busby chair now sits sealed behind steel and glass, never to be touched again. A small plaque reads simply, "Do not sit. Visitors pass by without knowing how close they stand to eternity. But if you linger, if you listen past the hum of the lights, you can hear a faint creak, as if someone is shifting in their seat, waiting for you to take theirs." The fire never claimed it because flame is purity, and purity has no power over what's already damned. The curse of Thomas Busby remains, patient, unburned, eternal.